Welcome back to another episode of Flawless Play in Garage, where today we are once again going to be working on this, my 1994 Buick Roadmaster station wagon, into which I am attempting to cram an LB7 Duramax 6.6 liter diesel V8 and Allison transmission. Is this a good idea? No. Does it fit? Also no. Have I cut up most of the vehicle in order to fit this engine and transmission in? Yes, I have. Does it fit yet? Also no. No, it kind of still doesn't, even after all that. But today, what we're going to try to do is make this thing so it will actually be possible to steer it, like with a steering wheel and stuff. Because despite my several videos I think I've done on this now, of having to completely re-engineer the rack system and the way the Corvette steering rack mounts and fits underneath the diesel engine in the Corvette front suspension and front subframe, I still didn't actually have a way to connect the steering column to the rack and, you know, actually make turny things happen with the front wheels when they do stuff. We don't do that yet, but that's going to change today. Stay tuned. Oh, steering, always a challenge. So what we have here, this is the steering column out of the wagon. This is the steering column out of the GMT 800, in this case diesel truck. I'm sure they're probably all the same. You might notice, dear astute viewer, that the wagon steering column is significantly longer than the truck steering column. Even, you might notice, that if I was to line up the way that they mount, or their mounting location kind of thing here, kind of get that lined up a bit, then you might notice that, you know, where they go through the firewall is significantly different, like 5 or 6 inches shorter. But you might also notice here that the overall length of the column and the location of the steering wheel is not radically different. The truck is a bit shorter, but it's not wildly different. It's off by an inch or two, enough that maybe it could be, if I needed to, you know, it could be solved with a spacer. The truck column has several significant advantages for me. One is that the column shifter is already set up to use the correct cable shifter for the Allison transmission. That's a big plus for me. The original Roadmaster steering column has, you know, a totally different shifter setup here. It's got a column shifter, but it goes to this rod, which is then supposed to actuate that old 4L60. And so, you know, this electrically obviously is set up very differently, but also the shifting mechanism is very different. The other significant difference that comes into play here with the length of these columns is the steering shaft. Let's take a look at that. Okay, so this is where the steering column actually comes through the firewall on the Roadmaster. Then you might notice it comes down here and we've got about an inch or so of space to go past the exhaust manifold. And then we've got to get way down there to the Corvette steering rack, which has been lowered inside the subframe. So this is a significant, this rack or steering box, whatever you want to call that there, it's located significantly lower in the car than the factory Roadmaster setup was. So this angle of dropping from the column down to the rack is much greater than originally would have been. And we have, you know, a pretty tough get around this exhaust manifold. You can see the factory exhaust manifold actually is indented to clear the truck steering rack or steering column that comes through this area. But because of where we're positioned here, like there's no way we're going to hit it in that spot. It's going to come through right where the flange is, where I have the least amount of room. So if I was to stick with the Roadmaster column, what happens is the flange for that Roadmaster column comes out to here, which makes dropping down past this flange very difficult. It makes for a really tough angle to drop. You either have to drop like straight down out of the steering rack to get around the flange over here, or come like straight across this way, drop down through this indented area, but that gives us a terrible angle to try to get into the steering rack. So this has been kind of my main factor pushing me away from using the Roadmaster column and instead using the truck column, because the pivot or the, that location of where it's going to come out of the truck column is like 5 or 6 inches back that way, which means I can have a significantly better angle coming out of the column. I can come down here and be on, close to the oil filter on the other side of this flange, and then get a much nicer angle down, to turn that corner and get down to my steering box. That, combined with the ease of the shifter situation, is pushing me to use the truck column here. The downside to the truck column is I will have a lot of sheet metal work to do here on the firewall, because somehow I need to actually mount the truck column with its, the rear portion of its mount clear back up in there 5 or 6 inches inside the car, and then have it come through the firewall in the right way and have this all protected by sheet metal so I don't have, the opportunity to have fire coming through that hole. This should be no problem at all. After all, I have one 18-inch wide sheet metal brake. That's my entire inventory of sheet metal tools. Shaping some kind of new firewall insert to go in there, no problem at all. I can easily do this. Oh boy. Okay, truck column plan. We start out with this 1-inch double D to 3/4 inch double D U-joint that also has a damper built in. It's going to go on the end of the truck column here, which I did have to very precisely reduce by about 20 thousandths. That'll slide on here. Then we'll have that U-joint. We'll have a small section of the 3/4 inch double D shaft, which will then go to this guy, the double U-joint, which can handle much higher angles than a single U-joint. This portion of the shaft will probably be supported by this guy, which I haven't opened yet. And then this guy, which goes from a 3/4 inch double D to a 17 millimeter double D, that goes into the steering box. And we'll have this guy supporting down against the subframe. So this will probably be through bolted on the subframe. This one will probably get welded to the frame itself. That is the plan. Now to figure out how to actually mount the steering column, especially against the firewall. This will get interesting. Obviously, safety is absolutely paramount on this build. It's priority number one. And, it's a big concern. It's older cars with these long steering shafts, and especially you're making a custom shaft. What if it's not collapsible enough in the event of a front-end accident that crams the entire firewall and the massive 850-pound diesel engine all the way into my lap? Well, what if the steering shaft also gets pushed back into me in that situation? Can't have that. So we're going very safe, and we are making the steering shaft out of pine. Or maybe it's because I bought this steel one and I only have enough to do it once, and I want to make sure I actually get it all mocked up properly, and I'd rather use something disposable to do that. No, it's the safety thing. That's it. Okay, progress via the wooden safety shaft here. So I've got my rough mount. That'll get more reinforcement later, but it's at least locating the back of the steering column, pretty much where it's going to have to be. Then I've cut open the original steering column hole rather extensively, but it gives me an angle to bring the shaft down and out of that first U-joint. Then it's going to get tough to see here probably, but I've got this support bearing here. Then I've got the double U-joint. I've got more wooden safety shaft, and then the U-joint that goes into the steering rack. So I think roughly I have the clearance I need. You can see it's a little tight to the exhaust manifold, but I think it'll be okay. It's all going to be steel, no anything to melt or anything, so the heat shouldn't bother it. My original plan had been to grind away some of the powder coating here on the frame and then weld this support to the frame and then come up with some way to support, I can get it to focus, some way to support this lower portion of the shaft. I think it has to be supported on both sides. I'll double check, but I think like the fact that this has flop in it, I think you have to support both sides of a double U-joint, but I'll double check and make sure that's true. Anyway, I was originally thinking, oh, I'll just knock a hole in the aluminum subframe and then use, he's down there, one of those eye bolt or through heim joint things coming up through the subframe. But that's not going to work because where I was going to put it, I thought, oh, there's a nice flat spot I can knock a hole in to support that. Yeah, except underneath there is the control arm. So you can't just put a bolt through that. So I don't know, got to think about that some more. Maybe I could drop something down from the frame up above and bring it across. But the next thing I'm really contemplating here is how am I going to get the engine out? Because if I weld too much stuff in right here as supports for the steering shaft, the engine will not drop out through the bottom. And kind of my rough plan for being able to quote unquote ever service this thing again was to be able to like unbolt the front subframe and then drop the engine and trans down with the subframe through the frame out through the bottom. So I thought that would be doable given that most of the engine is underneath the cowl. I don't know that it's going to come out from the top. And you will not be, there's no way you'll be able to get the transmission bolts out with the body on, like absolutely no way. So it would have to come with the transmission, and then I'm really not sure you'd ever be able to get it out with the transmission attached with the beast of a thing that is. So at the moment, I don't think I have any way to get the motor out again once I put it all together, other than taking the body off. Of course, Ford truck style, where you actually just have to take the cab off in order to service it. Yeah. I don't know. Anyway, it's going to take a little more thinking about how to come up with this secondary support for this. Okay, new flawless plan. So my special cardboard bracket here, the idea is I'm going to make mounts for the two supports, I guess I should say, where the first support will be bolted through this, and the second support up here can be attached here. So I'll make this plate, and the plate can actually be bolted to the frame. So I have these bolts already that bolt the Corvette suspension adapters through the frame, and the frame underneath is reinforced with sleeves and everything, so it's nice and strong. I might need longer bolts in the end, but that way I'll just have this plate to carry all the supports, and then it can be unbolted so that if I need to remove the engine and the drivetrain, I can unbolt the plate, take it off, get it out of the way, and then still do what needs to happen with the engine. So I think the theory is solid now, and the overall, not that you can really see it in here, but the cardboard I think is doing what it needs to do. So time to make this in steel. So the unwritten premise of this channel is that no mistakes are hidden. And my latest one here was while I was getting in and out of the car 3 or 4 times to test and size the bracket to hold the steering column. The car's up on the lift, and I have to use a ladder and then kind of hop into the car up on the lift. And I have some relatively low-hanging garage door rails. You see where this is going? I didn't. Remember, kids, life is hard, but it's harder when you're stupid. So, as you saw, climbing up there, trying to jump into the vehicle, catching that. Oh, I think I even bent it, the garage door rail, with my head. Yeah, I think I actually bent that a little bit. Oh, there might actually be blood on the edge of it too. Cool. Anyway, did quite a number on the noggin. I don't know if you can see that or not, the hair. Anyway, it hurts. Thankfully, God was merciful to me, a sinner and also an idiot. I happened to be wearing my stocking cap at the time, so it didn't cut nearly as badly as it otherwise might have. And it wasn't that deep of a cut. Big, but not deep, so I didn't get any stitches or anything. It stopped bleeding and mostly has cleaned up. No concussion or anything. I've had concussion before. Didn't get one this time. Definitely slowing me down though, big time. So, yeah. Word to the wise, look before you leap. In this case, especially if you're leaping up into a car that's on the lift. Yeah. Especially because I think this guy expects me to keep feeding him, so I need to stick around for a few more years.
A very,
all right.
very long year.
Very, very long year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Very.
Nice popcorn.
Yep.
Yeah, let's get back to work. And I'm pretty happy with this as a solution, I think. I like the fact that I can remove it in case I ever do have to take the engine out. And so you can't really see it once it's in the car bolted to the frame rail, but one of these 3 bolts were to bolt to the frame rail. And then I can do this one-handed on this very hot piece of metal. So it'll slide through this bearing. Come on, come on. There we go. And then we will have this guy down here, which will bolt through here. And a little of this action on here. You'll have to excuse me, this is my first time ever threading a nut onto a bolt. Yeah, something like that. So in the end, I don't know, this is not exactly the angle it is in the car, but it's close. I haven't double checked this, but this is maybe not much more than the 30-35 degrees that a normal single U-joint can take. It's possible that I could have gotten away with this whole contraption even without the double U-joint here. But I already had it because I'd already bought all the parts. And it was not going to save me a lot of money to like return this and go to a single U-joint. And other than a couple hours of work to fabric cobble this bracket together, I was going to have A support anyway, even with just one U-joint. So I feel pretty good about this overall. I think it'll be vaguely, kinda, sorta serviceable, and also vaguely, kinda, sorta accessible. And then we'll bolt it in and see whether the car actually steers. That'll be a first. There you can kind of see it. So there we've got my double, triple linkage steering gear. You can kind of see they're coming out of the rack and then mounted up to the plate that's bolted into the chassis rail right there. Obviously, before we call this really done, we're going to get that plate coated and everything, prevent things from rusting, add a little bit more reinforcement to it. But I do have a steering shaft. It is installed, and it is connected to something inside the car. You can see here I do have that steering shaft coming up into the truck column. I did have to modify the bracket that I made to give clearance for the brake pedal mount that needs to share some of those bolt holes up there. This will get a lot more cleaned up, reinforced later. But as a rough way to locate the back end of the column for now, that's enough to at least roll this thing around and steer it and make it a little bit more transportable. And I have temporarily misplaced my nut for the steering wheel, but otherwise we now have a steering system that actually turns the front wheels. You can turn the steering wheel and like the wheels move and stuff. Pretty crazy, I know, right? Okay, now I know you don't necessarily believe me when I say that turning the steering wheel actually turns the front wheels, but it does. Check this out. Oh, they're moving. They're moving. I don't know if you can see the, there you go, you can kind of see the U-joints moving there too. And I've got some aftermarket Corvette bump steer kit on the tie rod ends here to space those down so that they can be spaced down along with the steering rack, which is mounted lower. You can also kind of see I've still got some tightening up to do. There's a little bit of wiggle in this arrangement still, but I've got my plates, which have now been zinc coated, down there to mount the steering rack in its new lower position. You can see here my lines are nicely clear of the oil pan in their new position with their rerouting and new flares and everything. So, matter of fact, the oil pan will probably end up just a little bit lower than where it is right now, because the whole engine is going to come down just a skosh more, approximately the thickness of one of my washers down from where it is right now. But overall, I think what we have now is a steering system. So,
Sorry.
so it steers, you know, like a car does. Who'd have thought? Not me, certainly. Will it handle well? I have no idea. Probably not. Probably be kind of weird with a Corvette steering rack on something this big and boaty, but you know, whatever. For now, you can turn a steering wheel and the front wheels do the thing where they like point different ways, and Ackerman happens and cool stuff like that. So we're calling that a win for now. Moving on. Thanks for watching. See you next time.